My husband once told his friends I wasn't smart enough to understand his work. I smiled, holding the wine, while inside I memorized every word. He didn't know that while he slept, I was building something bigger than his quarterly bonuses. For 2 years, I worked in silence, letting him believe I was nothing more than a pleasant shadow. But shadows can grow, and on the day his boss saw my name on Forbes, under the headline Top 10 AI Innovators, Daniel's laughter died in his throat. That was the first time he realized the game had never been his. I used to think marriage was a partnership, 2 people walking side by side. That illusion didn't last long. When I left my marketing career at 34, it wasn't because I lacked ambition. It was because Daniel convinced me my support was essential for his future. He had a way of framing it that sounded noble. We'll win faster if we don't both chase the spotlight. So I stepped back, publicly. Privately, I watched. On social media, we were the golden couple. His firm hand on my back at events, his tailored suits, my carefully curated smile, it looked effortless. Friends commented on how lucky I was. They didn't hear the subtle jokes Daniel made at dinner parties. "Rachel doesn't really follow the finance talk," he'd chuckle to his colleagues, a glass of wine in hand, "but she makes the evenings look good." At first, I laughed along. It was easier that way. Every time he spoke, I stored the words in a quiet place inside me, a ledger of dismissals I never forgot. The most memorable came during a corporate gala. I wore a deep emerald dress that Daniel insisted would balance the seriousness of his presentation. As we mingled with his partners, he raised his champagne and with a grin told them, "She doesn't need to be smart. She just needs to look perfect standing next to me." Laughter rippled around the table. I smiled, my lips tight, and my grip on the glass firm. My heart didn't break, it calcified. That night, as Daniel slept, I opened my laptop. He thought I was scrolling through recipes. In reality, I was deep inside my AI marketing dashboard, reviewing client data and refining automation tools I'd been developing quietly for months. It started as a whisper of an idea, help small businesses automate their campaigns without paying inflated agency fees. By the time Daniel's firm announced record profits, my platform was quietly onboarding its 10th client, under a pseudonym, of course. Daniel had no idea. Neither did his family. His mother often called to check in, her tone sweet but layered with condescension. "You're keeping busy at home, I hope. Daniel works so hard, dear. Best not to stress yourself with those little tech hobbies." His sister, Claire, was blunter. "You've got a good life, Rachel. Most women would kill for it. Don't waste energy on something that won't go anywhere." I smiled through both conversations. Every word they spoke was another layer of camouflage. No one suspects the quiet one. The truth was, my nights were longer than Daniel's workdays. I networked through closed groups, reaching out to tech advisors in different time zones. I handled contracts, product testing, and client onboarding while the rest of the house slept. Months turned into a year. My startup, still anonymous, began gaining traction in niche business forums. I attended virtual events under my alias, listening more than I spoke. Every improvement to the software, every satisfied client was another brick in the foundation I was building beneath the perfect facade of our marriage. Then came the email. It arrived at 2:14 a.m., just as I was closing my laptop. Subject, invitation, Forbes AI Innovators to Watch Body. Your company has been selected as one of the top emerging AI marketing startups. We would be honored to feature you in our upcoming segment. I stared at the screen, the words sharp and bright in the dark room. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't reply. Not yet. Because the truth was, this wasn't just recognition. This was the beginning of something Daniel couldn't ignore. Something that would step out from the shadows I'd so carefully cultivated. I closed the laptop gently, the same way I always did, and slid back into bed. Daniel shifted, murmuring something about a meeting in the morning. I smiled into the darkness. He had no idea his meeting wouldn't be the most important one that month. From the outside, nothing had changed. I still woke up before Daniel, brewed his coffee, and asked about his calendar. I still hosted his colleagues for dinners, smiling and nodding as they spoke about quarterly goals I couldn't possibly understand. Daniel leaned into the image of his perfect home life. At a networking event, I overheard him tell his boss, Collins, "Rachel doesn't worry about the business world. She keeps everything peaceful at home so I can focus." Collins smiled approvingly. My husband thought he'd won something in that moment. The truth, his peaceful home was my battlefield. I deliberately kept my routine predictable. While Daniel believed my days were filled with errands and brunches, my real work started when the house emptied. My AI platform had evolved far beyond its beta version. It was now an adaptive system that analyzed ad performance in real time, adjusting creative strategies faster than any human marketer could. European clients were the first to notice. A small agency in Berlin reported a 48% boost in ROI within a month. A fashion retailer in Milan doubled their online revenue after integrating my tool. These successes brought new inquiries, each more serious than the last. Through encrypted chats, I negotiated my largest deal yet, with a multinational retailer based in Paris. The numbers were staggering, the kind of deal that could shift a company's trajectory overnight. But I wasn't ready to show my face. Not yet. At home, I continued my performance. When Daniel bragged about a promotion possibility, I congratulated him with genuine warmth. When his mother called to remind me about Claire's engagement party, I agreed to bring the dessert. Every interaction reinforced the same illusion. Rachel Carter, devoted wife with no ambitions outside her marriage. But while Daniel's colleagues saw a docile spouse, my name, my alias, was gaining weight in professional circles. A few industry blogs picked up case studies from my clients. Anonymous AI solution disrupts mid-market marketing. My competitors began to ask questions, but no one had answers. One night, after Daniel fell asleep watching a football game, I opened my laptop to an encrypted video call. My mentor, Evelyn, a retired tech CEO with a reputation for playing long games, appeared on screen. "You're sitting on a gold mine," she said, reviewing the Paris contract. "But you need infrastructure. If you sign this now, you can't run it alone. You'll need advisors, and you'll need to decide how much longer you want to stay in the shadows." I hesitated. The longer I stay hidden, the more control I have. Evelyn leaned in. "Control isn't hiding. It's choosing the moment to step into the light." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. Days later, the Paris deal closed. The numbers were finalized. My company, still operating under my pseudonym, was officially contracted as a primary vendor for one of Europe's largest retailers. This was no longer a passion project. This was a global player. And Daniel still thought I spent my afternoons browsing recipes. As the Paris contract moved into execution, I built out my network of advisors. Evelyn connected me to legal experts in London, finance strategists in New York, and a brand consultant in Los Angeles. Every piece of the puzzle fit together. My company began appearing in more industry publications. Forbes' AI Innovators to Watch wasn't the only list. TechVision profiled my platform as a black horse in the AI marketing race. But without a public CEO, the mystery only deepened. At home, Daniel noticed the articles but dismissed them. "Some tech fad," he said over dinner, scrolling past an article about my company. "These things pop up every year. Half of them vanish." I smiled and changed the subject. The more he underestimated me, the safer my plans became. But I knew the window of anonymity was closing. The Paris deal was too big to stay quiet for long. My advisors had already started preparing for a public reveal. The timing had to be perfect, not just for the company, but for me. I wasn't interested in revenge for its own sake. I wasn't trying to embarrass Daniel in front of his colleagues or prove his family wrong at the dinner table. What I wanted was control over my own narrative, and that meant revealing the truth on my terms. One evening, as I cleared the dishes from a dinner with Collins and his wife, I caught a fragment of conversation. Collins was telling Daniel about a potential client, ironically, one of my smaller accounts in Germany. Daniel laughed, assuring Collins that he could coach the client through the messy tech stuff. I almost laughed myself. Daniel had no idea he was talking about a company powered by my platform. After the guests left, Daniel leaned against the counter, glass of whiskey in hand. Collins likes that I'm stable, that I don't have drama at home. It's good for my position. I nodded. I'm glad I can help. And I meant it. My stability was the one thing he could count on, until I decided otherwise. Late that night, my phone pinged. It was another email from Forbes. This time, it wasn't just an invitation to an event. It was a request for a feature profile. They wanted an interview. They wanted a name. I sat in the dark kitchen, the glow of the screen reflecting in my coffee cup. The moment was coming sooner than I expected. Daniel's world was built on the belief that I needed him. In a matter of weeks, he would realize the truth. The empire he was so proud of wasn't the only one in the house. And mine was stronger. Daniel's voice carried through the kitchen as I set the last wine glasses on the table. Collins, you'll love this Cabernet. Rachel picked it out. She has a great eye for the small details that make an evening work. His words were wrapped in charm, but I knew the subtext. Rachel shines best as a supporting character. I smiled as if I hadn't heard it 100 times before. Dinner went as expected. Collins, his wife Margaret, and a potential client named Harris gathered around the table. Daniel took every opportunity to frame himself as the composed, ambitious executive, one with a wife who keeps things uncomplicated. Collins laughed at his anecdotes, but I caught a subtle flicker in his expression when Margaret asked me about my background. I worked in marketing for a while, I said, keeping my tone casual. But now I mostly focus on our home. Daniel's schedule is demanding. Collins nodded politely, his attention already shifting back to Daniel. He liked clever women, but he clearly didn't think I was one of them, and that was fine. For now. The evening ended with handshakes and promises of future meetings. As Daniel closed the door behind them, he turned to me with a grin. Perfect dinner. Collins respects stability. We gave him exactly that. I just smiled. A week later, Daniel left for a business conference in Chicago. His schedule was packed with panels, networking events, and a highly publicized keynote attended by industry leaders and Forbes. I stayed home, as expected, the supportive wife. But I knew the conference schedule better than Daniel did. I had my own slot on the second day, quietly arranged under my company's name. My advisors and I had decided this was the moment. On the second morning of the conference, Daniel texted me a photo of himself in the hotel lobby, all confidence and tailored suit. Big day, the message read. He didn't know how big. That afternoon, the Forbes panel began. Top 10 AI marketing startups to watch. The lights dimmed, the audience buzzing. On the massive screen behind the stage, names and logos appeared one by one. Number 5, number 4, and then number 3, Arden AI Marketing Solutions. My company. The slide shifted, revealing the CEO's name, Rachel Carter. My photo appeared next, a professional headshot taken just weeks earlier. For a moment, the room was silent. Then came the murmur, the surprised whispers. Collins was in the front row. I could see his posture shift. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes sharpened as he looked from the screen to Daniel. Daniel's face froze in something between shock and disbelief. His attempt at a smile looked brittle. He turned slightly in his seat as though trying to gauge if anyone else had noticed. Everyone had. I walked onto the stage. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each step measured, unhurried. I greeted the panelists, shook hands with the moderator, and began speaking, not to Daniel, not to Collins, but to the audience who had never heard my voice in this context before. I talked about scalable solutions for mid-market companies, about adaptive campaign systems, about the Paris contract. The words flowed easily. This was my world, my arena. When the session ended, the applause was strong, genuine. I stepped off the stage and into the networking area. A few reporters approached, business cards in hand. Across the room, Collins was speaking quietly to Harris. His gaze flicked toward me briefly, then back to Daniel. The dynamic had shifted in an instant. Daniel avoided me for the rest of the conference. I didn't mind. I wasn't there for him. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Evelyn. The balance just changed. Don't waste the moment. I smiled. Daniel's grip on his carefully constructed image was slipping, and for the first time, he didn't have the faintest idea how to stop it. The day after my name appeared on the Forbes screen, my inbox was unrecognizable. Invitations, interview requests, partnership proposals, they flooded in like a tide I'd been waiting for. But one stood out, a formal invitation to deliver a keynote address the following morning. I accepted. The ballroom was already buzzing when I stepped onto the stage. My voice was steady as I spoke about the future of AI marketing, about transparency and automation, about the necessity of innovation that puts smaller companies on equal footing with global corporations. I didn't need to name names. Every word was a quiet rebuttal to every condescending laugh I had ever endured. When the applause came, it was thunderous. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. The story wasn't just my technology anymore. It was me. As I stepped down, Collins was waiting. "Rachel," he said, shaking my hand with a firmness that felt different this time. "We need to talk." We found a quiet corner. Collins didn't waste words. "Our firm has been looking for scalable AI solutions. Your platform solves the exact gaps we've been fighting to close. I'd like to discuss a strategic partnership." His tone was measured, professional, but beneath it, I could sense something else: respect. Across the room, Daniel lingered near the bar, his expression unreadable. He was speaking to Harris, but his eyes flicked toward us again and again. He looked like a man surrounded by walls he hadn't realized were closing in. That evening, news of my keynote and the potential partnership spread quickly. It wasn't long before I began hearing from industry contacts that Daniel's colleagues were rethinking his value. The narrative had shifted, and he was no longer in control of it. Still, I kept my distance. I didn't humiliate him publicly. I didn't need to. My restraint did more for my image than any sharp remark ever could. The shift became impossible to ignore 2 weeks later. Collins' firm had been negotiating a contract with a major client. It was a deal Daniel had championed for months, one that was supposed to cement his standing. But when the client learned my company could provide a faster, more cost-effective solution, they pivoted. The contract landed on my desk. It wasn't personal, it was business. Daniel's office felt the blow almost immediately. At an executive meeting, whispers began circulating. Daniel had missed the opportunity to secure an advantage that had been in his own household. Some saw it as incompetence, others as arrogance. Either way, the damage was done. Collins didn't criticize him openly, but I heard from mutual acquaintances that his confidence in Daniel had waned. The respect that had once flowed so easily toward my husband was now being redirected to me. Through it all, I kept my stance. I didn't interfere. I didn't offer to help Daniel salvage the deal. He had built his career on dismissing me. Now he would have to face the consequences alone. In private, he was quieter. At dinners, he spoke less. When his mother called, her voice hesitant, asking if I might talk to Collins on Daniel's behalf, I gently changed the subject. It wasn't revenge, it was boundaries. The truth was simple. I had built something strong enough to stand without his approval. And Collins, the man who once believed I was merely a background figure, now saw me as one of the most valuable players in the industry. Daniel's empire was cracking. Mine was just beginning. Daniel's downfall wasn't sudden. It happened the way buildings collapse, one fracture at a time. First came the contract he lost to my company. Then a second client shifted their interest toward our platform. At the next quarterly review, Collins didn't mention Daniel's name at all. The silence spoke louder than any reprimand. 2 months later, Daniel's resignation was announced. The statement was polite, but everyone in the industry knew what it meant. He hadn't chosen to step down. At home, he moved through the days with a subdued air. His phone stopped buzzing. The dinners he used to dominate with work stories were now quiet. He didn't speak about my success, and I didn't press. My own schedule left little room for reflection. Invitations from investors poured in. Venture capital firms, international distributors, and strategic partners wanted a piece of ardent AI. The attention was intoxicating but heavy. With every handshake came a contract to review, a risk to calculate. The growth that once felt thrilling now came with the weight of responsibility. One afternoon, my mother-in-law called. Her voice, once dripping with subtle criticism, was sweet enough to set my teeth on edge. "Rachel, dear," she began, "I was wondering if you and Daniel might come over for dinner this weekend. The family's so proud of you. We'd love to celebrate your achievements properly." In the background, I could hear Claire chiming in. "You've become such an inspiration." I agreed to dinner, but kept my tone measured. I had no interest in old battles, nor in granting them the closeness they now sought. The evening played out exactly as I expected. Compliments flowed easily, their earlier skepticism conveniently forgotten. I smiled, thanked them, and kept the conversation away from business. By the time we left, Daniel looked more drained than I'd seen him in months. In the car, he said nothing. The truth was, success had changed the dynamics in every direction. I had influence, but it came with a constant need to protect the company and myself. That need became urgent 3 weeks later. It started as whispers, rumors in trade publications that a major competitor was circling ardent AI. Soon, my legal team uncovered the truth. A multinational corporation was attempting a hostile takeover through loopholes in international regulations. The shock wasn't in the attack itself. Competitors were inevitable. The surprise came in how much they seemed to know about our internal operations. I ordered an internal review. The findings hit like a punch. Certain strategic documents had been accessed from an unsecured device linked to my home network. Daniel's device. He hadn't acted out of malice, at least not consciously. But during his final weeks at the firm, in casual conversations with old colleagues, he had referenced details he didn't realize were sensitive. Those details had found their way into the wrong hands. I didn't confront him directly. Instead, I focused on the solution. Within 48 hours, I assembled my senior advisors. Collins was the first to respond. "You've built something that matters," he said during a late-night call. "And that's exactly why they're coming for you. I have resources, legal, financial, strategic. If you're willing, we can form an alliance. They won't see it coming." It was a calculated move. Collins wasn't offering help out of sentiment. He saw the value in protecting ardent AI for his own firm's advantage. But in this moment, our interests aligned. We moved quickly. My legal team closed the loopholes the rival company had been exploiting. My communications team crafted a controlled narrative, positioning the attempted takeover as validation of ardent AI's dominance. Within weeks, the threat was neutralized. Publicly, my company emerged stronger than before. Privately, I understood the price. Success didn't just attract applause, it drew enemies. As I sat in my office late one evening, reviewing the latest projections, Collins' words echoed in my mind. They won't see it coming. Neither would the next one. And I intended to be ready. The takeover attempt had been a wake-up call, not just for my company, but for me. I'd spent years hiding my ambition under layers of discretion, moving carefully to avoid drawing too much attention before the right time. Now the time had come. I turned down the acquisition offers that began pouring in after the failed takeover. Some were generous enough to make even my most seasoned advisors pause. But I wasn't interested in selling. Instead, I announced a new phase of growth. Ardent AI would expand operations into Asia and Europe simultaneously. It was bold, risky, and exactly what the market didn't expect from a company still seen as emerging. The restructuring began immediately. We opened offices in Singapore and Berlin. I brought in regional experts, built partnerships with local agencies, and adapted our platform to handle multilingual markets. In under a year, Ardent AI transformed from a promising startup into a global standard. Through it all, I kept my personal life quiet. Daniel had moved into a smaller apartment downtown. He didn't ask for help, and I didn't offer. Our conversations, when they happened, were polite but brief. One evening, we crossed paths at an industry event. He stood alone, drink in hand, as I walked past with Collins and a delegation from Tokyo. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no anger in his expression, just something heavier, regret. He looked like a man who finally understood he had been standing beside an empire, never realizing it wasn't his. But I didn't stop. There was no point in revisiting what had already been decided by actions, not words. By the time Ardent AI's expansion stabilized, the company's valuation had climbed beyond what I'd imagined in those early nights working in the dark. We weren't just competing anymore. We were setting the standard. And with that visibility came a different kind of recognition. Forbes called, then Bloomberg, then TED. The narrative was irresistible to them. The underestimated wife dismissed in her own home, quietly building one of the most influential AI companies in the market. The story wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about transformation. Collins attended the TED Talk event in New York, taking a seat near the front. The audience was filled with investors, industry leaders, and students. Cameras lined the back of the room. Backstage, a producer clipped a microphone to my dress. "Your closing words matter most," she said. "People will remember the last 30 seconds more than anything else." I stepped onto the stage to a round of applause. I didn't begin with numbers or growth charts. I began with a story, my story. I spoke about the years of quiet work, about the discipline of building something in the shadows, about the misconceptions that can become armor if you let them. I didn't mention Daniel by name. I didn't need to. As I moved toward the close, I looked out at the audience, letting my gaze rest briefly on the camera. "Intelligence," I said, "isn't something someone else hands you. It isn't validated by approval or titles or applause. It's something you build in silence, day after day, until the world can't ignore it anymore." The room went still for a moment, and then the applause began rising until it filled the auditorium. Somewhere out there, I knew Daniel would see this talk, maybe in a news clip, maybe in a replay online. He'd recognize the message even if no one else did. But this wasn't about him anymore. As the lights dimmed and I stepped off the stage, I realized something had shifted. My story no longer belonged to me alone. It belonged to anyone who had ever been underestimated, anyone who had been told they weren't enough, anyone who had quietly built their own proof. Ardent AI had grown into a company that no longer needed my constant defense. It had its own momentum now, its own place in the market. And I had grown into someone who no longer needed to answer the dismissals of the past. Daniel would go on with his life. I would go on with mine. The distance between us wasn't punishment. It was simply the space created by the different paths we'd chosen. In the months that followed, I traveled constantly, speaking in Singapore, signing partnerships in Berlin, mentoring young entrepreneurs in San Francisco. At every stop, someone would mention the TED Talk. It was the phrase they always repeated back to me, "You build it in silence until the world can't ignore it anymore." The phrase had taken on a life of its own, and I didn't mind, because that was the truth of it. The empire I'd built hadn't been born from revenge, but from the quiet, relentless decision to keep building, and the world had finally noticed.